Hello, and welcome to this week's instalment of Washed Ashore, our podcast. You're joined by me. I am in the host seat once again, Max, fluffing up as usual. I'm joined once again by my good colleague and friend, Charlotte. Charlotte, how are you? Long time no see.
It's a very long time no see. I only ever hear your voice these days.
Exactly. Well, you're quite. But
Yeah,
long time no hear. It doesn't
long
really
time
quite
no
work.
hear. No, it's fine. I'm glad to be back on the podcast, although I feel I might need to take back control at some point soon.
Please come back and host.
Yeah,
Just please. It's so
I will.
stressful. Lovely to have you back on. It's been a little while now. So
it has been a little while. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the Heritage and Education Centre at the moment. Lots of new content online, lots of research that needs to be done, all sorts of exciting things coming up as well. So yeah, I've been a bit busy, but I'm happy to be back on the podcast.
oh, nice. Well, yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of things that are sort of coming up, in the on the horizon for social media and for the website and things, please keep a lookout. Later on at the end of this month, we are hoping to upload another approximately 30,000 documents to our online CMS. So yeah, keep your eyes posted. Keep your eyes posted. Keep your eyes peeled. Keep your eyes peeled for that. Keep your eyes posted. It's been a long day.
It has.
So obviously, as you know, our theme for this month has been the Second World War and exploring some of the stories, the archive records, and just other bits and pieces that we've come across related to the Second World War. And this, really, I suppose, brought back to light one of the blogs that you wrote back in September 2018 about a particularly famous ship, the SS Athenia, the very first ship to be sunk by Germany during the Second World War. But it also has obviously quite a personal connection to you. So I gather you are going to be sort of recounting that story and why it does have such a strong personal connection to you and your family.
Yeah, thanks for that lovely introduction there, Max.
Thanks very much.
So the SS Athenia, as Max just said, was the first Allied ship to be sunk by Germany in the Second World War. And my great-grandfather, George Edwin Price, he was serving on HMS Electra, and this ship led the rescue mission for those that had been on the Athenia. So firstly, sort of a bit about George Edwin Price. So he is my dad's maternal grandfather, born in Staffordshire in 1898. Which most of my family are from the East End, so to find someone that was born in Staffordshire was a bit of a shock to begin with. It was a bit shock horror, but he does eventually move to the East End, so it's fine. And yeah,
that's all right.
And just before the outbreak of the First World War, he joined the Royal Navy. And in my dad's loft, we have boxes upon boxes of family history, as I'm sure everyone does. And one of those collections is George's naval records. Yeah, so bits and pieces. So we have his service history and other bits and pieces. And then, again, so many people have got into sort of genealogy and using ancestry. And my father and I have been sort of building that family history together, because there's a lot my dad doesn't really know about his family, and kind of the ins and outs of certain people that he's heard about, but can't really pinpoint exactly what they did. So George Edwin was one of those that we were interested in, both being really interested in naval history. So he joined as a young boy, and he first served on a ship called HMS Impregnable. And then during the First World War, George was at the Battle of Jutland on HMS Constance.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's very impressive naval record so far.
He's doing all right for himself.
Absolutely.
Isn't he? Yeah, he's all right. So by this point, by the First World War, he was 18 years old. He was a naval seaman. This is his career rather than just joining during the First World War. He's having a career in the Navy. One great thing about his naval records is that they have very sort of detailed descriptions of how he looked as a man. So we know that he had blue eyes, a fair complexion, and he had tattoos of anchors on his forearms, which which is a great, as someone that even my dad didn't meet because he died before my dad was born. You know, this is really nice to kind of be able to visualize him, as it were. And the thing about the blue eyes is a sort of an unusual thing in my family. Most people in my family have brown eyes. In fact, nearly everyone. But I strangely have grey blue eyes. So I was always a bit of an anomaly. But it's nice to sort of maybe it came from George Edwin. It's a nice little link for me. Yeah, so after Jutland, he continued his service in the Navy. In 1923, he married and settled in Mile End, and he married a lady called Agnes Groom, and they had their first daughter, Molly, 2 years later, and then they had their second daughter, Lillian Nancy, and she was my grandmother, and she was born in 1932. So unfortunately, my grandmother Lillian died when I was very little, but great auntie Molly lived well into her 90s and died maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago now. So yeah, quite sort of contrast there between the two. And for Lillian, my grandmother, not only would she have her father serving in the Navy, she also had her future husband, my grandfather, Leonard George, serving in the Navy during the Second World War. So the Navy was quite prominent in my family's history. That and the fact that those that were around in the East End were often dockers down there as well, and stevedores. So yeah, a bit of a sort of naval ship-based heritage, which is possibly why I'm working in maritime heritage today.
I mean, it all fits.
It works, isn't it? You know. So at the outbreak of the Second World War, just before, George was posted to HMS Electra, and she was one of 9 E-class destroyers. And when we were going through his naval records, my dad and I, we found this letter, and I'd not seen it before. Didn't know much about it at all. My dad didn't know much about it at all. But it reads, "Gentlemen, on behalf of the passengers and crew you rescued from SS Athenia, I thank you one and all for your capable and efficient rescue, your courtesy and most open-hearted kindness to us all. It is really difficult to express our gratitude, but the traditions of His Majesty's Navy are so well known that it suffices for me to say that as soon as it became apparent you were going to pick us up, we knew it would be home to us all aboard from the youngest child upwards. You have upheld the tradition well, Electra, and have earned our deepest and everlasting gratitude. On behalf of those who have picked up, I remain most gratefully yours, John R. MacDonald."
God, wow.
Yeah.
That's an amazing record to have. Yeah.
It's an incredible record to have.
Excellent.
And I'm so, as soon as I saw it, I was so proud to read it. But then obviously being a maritime naval historian, working in a maritime archive, I had to find out more. And thought, okay, well, what's the context to this letter? What happened? I don't know what my great grandfather was involved in. So then I did a bit of digging, and I had known about, you know, the SS Athenia and it being the first ship to be sunk, Allied ship to be sunk during the Second World War, but I didn't know much about, you know, the circumstances around the sinking. And it turns out obviously quite a pivotal moment in the Second World War and its history. So she was built for the Anchor Donaldson line and launched in 1922. She was not classed by Lloyd's Register, which was disappointing for me. I was hoping to find plans, survey reports, letters, all sorts, but she wasn't classed by Lloyd's Register, which is a shame. But she is in the register book, of course.
That's
And
all right then.
yeah, exactly. You know,
Yeah.
she's there, and she worked the route from Liverpool to Glasgow to Quebec and Montreal. So she was going across the Atlantic. And it was often either transporting people visiting, going on holiday, but then also immigrants to and from Europe and America and Canada. So you can imagine that on the 1st of September 1939, when the Athenia was about to travel across the Atlantic again, there were over 1,000 passengers, 350 members of crew, and obviously a lot of these passengers were men, women, children, going for a new life, or going visiting somewhere. It wasn't, it wasn't because they were transporting soldiers or troops or anything. These were people. So though obviously on the 1st of September 1939 it was clear war would break out, and it was advised to the Athenia, maybe you shouldn't sail. It's possibly the First World War with the U-boat campaigns and what happened to Allied shipping then. The same fear was there, of course. The campaigns would continue in the Second World War, but they decided to go. So on 3rd of September, off of Ireland, she was spotted by the German submarine U-30, and they believed that the Athenia was a troop ship, because that classic tactic of a ship zigzagging to avoid being hit by a torpedo, in a U-boat, and that's what the Athenia was apparently doing. So the German submarines thought, it's a naval passengers or people, members of the public. So they attacked, and I believe that a torpedo went into a side and hit the engine room, and then of course the Athenia sends out a distress call, which Electra, amongst many other ships, answers. And because the captain of the Electra was one of the more senior members of the Royal Navy who attended this incident, he took charge of the situation. So between these ships, including the Electra, there are around 900 of the 1,300 or so that were on board. 900 of them were saved, but unfortunately that means still a large number of people died in this incident. So my great-grandfather, although I still don't really know exactly what role he played or what he was doing or how he was helping, he was on Electra, and he was involved in some way or another in the rescue of these poor people that had been were on a sinking ship. So then there's a controversial thing around the sinking of the Athenia. So because this was at the start of the war, or just at the start of the very, very start of the war, Germany initially denied any involvement in her sinking, because many of the passengers were American and Canadian. There was a fear that if they said, "Yep, that was us," America would immediately join the war, as as you might expect. So they denied it. A rumor was put around by Germany and sort of their allies in Europe that it was actually the British that sank her for propaganda, so that the British press could then say, "Oh, look at how awful Germany is. This is why we need to go to war, and this is what they do, and they've done it again." And it was actually even suggested that Winston Churchill, who at this point was First Lord of the Admiralty, who had orchestrated it in order to make sure that all those that were neutral against Germany turned on Germany for the war. And believe it or not, this was a widely accepted idea across Europe, that the British had done this to themselves. Obviously, this has never been proven. It did not happen, but it's sort of incredible to sort of think that that's what was believed. So the truth of the sinking of the SS Athenia didn't really come out until the Nuremberg trials in 1946. So though the letter that my great-grandfather received was sent on the 5th of September by one of the survivors, and there were newspapers across Britain reporting, you know, first ships sank, or because one of the victims who died was a young Canadian girl, and she's considered to be the first Canadian casualty of the Second World War. Again, it's that sort of reporting of, you know, Canadian girl killed in the war. So although it was, people knew, and obviously those who could see it off the coast of Ireland and those involved in the rescue knew about it, it was still kept a bit hush-hush. So at the Nuremberg trials, Germany finally accepted responsibility. And it all finally came out that, you know, yep, that's what they'd done, this is what they had thought. You know, thought it wasn't, it thought it was a troop ship, thought it was a naval vessel. But yeah, it wasn't until then that it all sort of came out. And yeah, so that's sort of the story of the SS Athenia. My great-grandfather was invalided out of the Navy soon after. He was very, very badly injured, and he died in 1950. And my grandfather, Leonard George, who was George Edwin's son-in-law, as I said, he also joined the Navy during the Second World War. The famous story of him is that he stole his older brother's birth certificate and ran off and joined the Navy at too young of an age, served throughout the war, and then was part of the £10 POM scheme after the war, going to Australia, which I know, Max, you helped dig out some records for us about the ship plans that he was on. So yeah, that's kind of my personal connection to the sinking of the SS Athenia and my Second World War story.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Yeah, it's quite something to be able to place, you know, a direct member of your family to something that's quite a key pivotal moment in you know, in history, and particularly, you know, the pivotal moment in the Second World War and the war at sea. Yeah, it's quite really fascinating. And I must admit, this is, yeah, it's not really, you know, I suppose a part of the war that I knew an awful lot about. I had heard of the Athenia, but obviously never really the idea, all of the kind of, I suppose, sort of conspiratorial type theories that were spread afterwards and disseminated. You know, I had absolutely no idea about. It's quite something as well that obviously the truth of you know, the events wasn't fully made to light until the Nuremberg trials. Had no idea it was as late as that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that is 6-7 years after it actually happens that finally they get some answers. And considering everything else that was going on at the Nuremberg trials and all the questions that needed answers, and to go back to the 3rd of September 1939 and say, what happened here? Because these was, you know, these are people that lost their lives so early on in the war that shouldn't have. You know, no one should have lost their life during the war, but these were innocent victims that, you know, admittedly, possibly the captain and that should have said, yeah, maybe we shouldn't set off just at the outbreak of a war. Possibly not the best idea, but also I don't think they expected a German U-boat to be off the coast of Ireland patrolling.
No, I suppose by that point it was slightly difficult to see, you know, in defence of the captain. I suppose it was slightly, you know, it was very difficult to see how the war would play out, and what the sort of, you know, the tactics of warfare, especially warfare at sea, would be like, and whether or not it would be like the way, you know, the same sorts of tactics that were in operation in the First World War would continue on, and obviously just how quickly they would be able to mobilise.
And I think we know with the, you know, with the history of the Second World War and its beginning, you know, the sort of starts known as the Phony War.
Of
when it
course,
just
yeah.
really, I say get going, I don't know how you want a war to get going, but you know, what would you do? Stop the country running, and for want of a better word, lock it down?
Yeah, yeah.
Or do you sort of keep going, and then deal with the consequences once they've happened? It's yeah,
It's very
it's
tricky.
yeah, and it
Incredibly
doesn't really
tricky one to
bear
do. Yeah.
thinking about, really. I think it's, I'm glad I wasn't making the decisions, and I'm glad I wasn't around then to be involved in those decisions.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think for me as well, and for my family, this is not a story that was ever passed down or told. As I said, it took my dad and I sitting with the documents and going through them and reading things and trying to piece who was who, and what George was doing, and what was going on with his family. And it wasn't a story that was ever told. And to be honest, a lot of the stories from my great grandfather and my grandfather during the Second World War and as their service in the Navy, again, was never really shared.
Yeah.
And it, thankfully, through documents being made available and the access to family records, it really helps to piece those sort of things together and find out those stories.
Archives, I'm telling you.
Oh,
Archives,
well,
it's
do you
it.
know what? I'm convinced now that archives are a good thing.
Yeah. If you hadn't already been convinced through all of the other ones that we've ever done and any of other material that you've seen on the website that archives are a good thing, then I think that should do it.
That this is it. This is why I'm on, to tell this story so that people
Yeah.
visit archives and use them.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's like this with so many things as well. I mean, especially from that period, there are so many stories that that just weren't passed down because of the trauma involved, and just simply because I think people just tended not to want to speak about those sorts of things and to revisit
Yeah,
them.
and I think there's that sort of, unless you really push them to try and talk, they're not going to. And I think, when, unfortunately, as I said, George Edwin died before my dad was born. Had he been alive and my dad was growing up, I think my dad probably would have wanted to know more from him, because he, even as a boy, he was fascinated by this sort of stuff. But I think I think of that generation, the ones that come after, are being born after the Second World War, there is almost that sort of, almost like a quiet, unofficial acknowledgement that you don't really ask, or you don't really push. You don't want to you're not supposed to find out more. And then our generation want to find out more, and feel a bit more able to push, or to ask the right questions, or to have more material at hand. But then, unfortunately, we're losing that Second World War generation, or the First World War generation is all but gone, and the Second World War generation is going, and then those stories are lost, which is a real shame. And I think there's so many. I know even in my family tree, even we found a great uncle. We had no idea about, who died at the beginning of the First World War, and he's buried over in France, and never knew about him. His wife and child had died before he had died in the First World War, so nothing known about him. And I think lots of people are finding those stories, aren't they, throughout their family history, where it's, okay, who was this person and what happened to them? I was only told so and so did something else, and it's a rumor in the family, and then you find out, oh, hang on, it might be true, or not, or it's even worse than you thought, or it's better than you thought. I just think it's brilliant, but I think there is that, unfortunately, those stories are being lost, and I think as archivists and historians, it's important to capture them.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it does. It really does make you think just how many of these stories and just really just fascinating tales of that period are just are sitting in people's lofts,
Mm.
in people's garages, in their, just tucked away at the back in a box, or it's yeah, it's incredibly interesting to think about it. And as you say, it's so many of these stories are being lost, and the longer that it's so important that we try and capture them now while we're able to, and while we've got as much wherewithal and resources to be able to try and target them. It's absolutely, it really is essential. And especially given, I think, with Remember Day, see the other week, and what a strange event that was to witness on
Yeah.
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very bizarre. But no,
But
it's
still,
absolutely fascinating.
despite everything, people still wanted to do that. They still wanted to walk to their memorial in the town, even if it wasn't how it was done every year with parades. And I always remember when I was in the Air Cadets, marching up and down the high street where I grew up, and every year standing freezing cold, always freezing cold at the memorial. But every big crowds would gather. I say big crowds. We were a small town. A big crowd for a small town would gather, but everyone would, and everyone would do it. But the fact that people, I still wandered down to the local memorial where I live, and paid my respects, and I still wore a poppy, even if I wasn't going out. It was still attached to my coat, and to see it on the TV that they were still going ahead with things. I think that just shows that these stories are still so important and so relevant, and we all do still like to think about that, even in times that we're going through at the moment. They're still thinking about those of our those of our ancestors, and those of our stories of families and that from the past. I think it's still quite something.
It is. Yeah. There's something incredibly evocative about all of those kinds of letters and those documents. And so I suppose, I had a couple of questions. In terms of I know I just sprung them on you right at the end.
Right.
But yeah, so the letter that you've got from
Yes.
the John R. MacDonald, who was do you know who that was? Was that a member of the crew, or?
As far as I can tell, and I think this is one I'm still gonna. This is still a story I'm still digging around.
Right, I see. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm still wanting to find out more about what happened. But as far as I can tell, he was one of the passengers,
Right,
and survived, of course, and sent this letter, of which there is an image of it on the blog, on the website, which we will link to. But sent this letter, and I believe it was sort of sent to the commander, or the captain of the Electra, and then was shared. A copy was sent to everyone who was involved in the crew. But yeah, so I think he was a passenger. So you can see on the letter in the top left-hand corner, you've
Yes.
got my great grandfather's name there, G.
Right.
Price. So I can only assume it was kind of just sent around the crew as a thank you. And I mean, I don't know how often this happened, as someone who might have survived a sinking and been rescued. How often did people write letters? I don't know. I'd be fascinated if anyone has anything similar, or if anyone has their own great grandfather that served on HMS Electra.
Yeah.
With my great grandfather, it's yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's yeah. I must admit it's yeah. I remember when I first read it. It's quite a stunning document to have in and of itself. Because obviously, as you say, I've never really seen a document quite like that. Especially when you think, or rather, I think I've seen them a few times in sort of peacetime, in the archive and things like that, where I suppose they maybe would have had more of an opportunity to do that later on. But
yeah, especially I've never seen a wartime document quite like that, and it's
No.
amazing record to
Yeah.
to have and
And
to still be able to retain.
yeah, you know, and it's still, you'll be pleased to know, Max, it's still safe at home.
Nice.
It's been packed away nicely. It's in a box. You
Perfect.
can see from the photo, it ends up being a bit dog-eared after a while, but it's probably been through a fair number of lofts in its history, unfortunately. But it's still there. It's still looked after. So don't worry too much about that, Max. But
No, that's fine.
but yeah, yeah, exactly. But the fact that that this is the 5th of September 1939, war has broken out, and this John McDonald, who this is 2 days after he's involved in an incident like that, and he's writing a really nice letter to the crew of the Electra. Yeah, there's something about that as well.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. I'd love to know what happened to John R. MacDonald.
I was just about to say,
really
yeah,
like
it'd be
to know.
amazing to be able to find out, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, interesting. And obviously, yeah, as Charlotte says, there's the blog is on the website. It's called the SS Athenia, and it's got some excellent pictures on there, including a picture of the record in question, the letter from John R. MacDonald, one of the survivors from the SS Athenia, and also really, really great picture as well of George Edwin Price and Agnes Groom as well.
Yeah.
Again, it's a great picture.
That is one that was in the box of stuff that we've got, and it was through a bit of digging and a bit of sort of figuring things out that we realised that that is George Edwin and Agnes Groom, and I think both sorts of quite that typical sort of 1920s, 1930s stoic looking, an incredible stoic lace collar that Agnes has got on, and obviously him wearing his naval uniform is I do really like that photo. Yeah,
it's quite something.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much for sharing that. That's as I say, amazing story, and it's great being able to listen to you recount it, really, and to kind of share what you have and what's survived from it. Yeah, it's excellent.
Thank you. It was a pleasure telling the story.
Oh, thanks very much. Well, so before I go, I should probably say as well, please keep a lookout on our social media platforms at LRF Heck. That's on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you didn't just listen to our last podcast recording, check it out. I was speaking to Matt Skelhorn from the Salvage and Marine Operations Department of the Ministry of Defence on how they are using our records as well as others to be able to kind of carry out salvage and remediation on wrecks around the world. So that was really, really fascinating. And keep a lookout on our website, heck.lrfoundation.org.uk. And I don't think I've missed anything there, have I?
No, perfect, Max. Well done.
Oh, perfect. Maybe I should just host it.
Maybe, yeah. I'm out of a job
now. No, please come back.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much again. Yeah, that was excellent. Yeah, really interesting.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, and thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.